Wrocław Zoo does not get as much attention as it should get. How many of you will be surprised to learn that this is one of the most species-rich zoos in the world? That's no exaggeration. There are over 1,000 different animal species living here. Additionally, it's the oldest zoo in Poland, opening its door all the way back in 1865. And you can definitely feel this rich history in certain corners of the park, even if that's not always a compliment. Though thankfully not everything here is outdated. The Africarium, opened in 2014, is the modern centerpiece of Wrocław Zoo, with an aquarium, hippos, manatees, fur seals and more. But does the Africarium really deliver across the board? And what about the rest of the 33-hectare zoo? Well, that's what we're here to find out. But before I share my own thoughts, let me know yours down in the comments. Especially if you have been here before, let me hear your opinions. I for once am really excited to bring you along to my very first zoo visit in Poland, and it certainly won't be the last. With Łódź Zoo, another true highlight still awaits, so don't forget to subscribe. And I bet you will never guess the other two facilities I visited in Poland, but feel free to take a guess and tell me which zoos I should definitely visit in the future. Anyway, back to Wrocław in southwestern Poland and into the zoo itself, where you can skip the wait at the ticket counter thanks to the modern ticket machines. And then, looking at the map, the big question arises right away. Do you head straight into the Africarium or save the supposed highlight for the very end? Which is exactly what we are going to do for the video. But don't worry, as you should expect from one of the most species-rich zoos in the world, the rest of the park has plenty to offer as well, and we are nevertheless still heading over to the African continent. First up is the lion enclosure, which is one of the newest additions to the park, as it was opened in 2024. And you can definitely see that. The 3,000 square meter enclosure looks modern and thoughtfully designed. Multiple glass viewing areas give you great perspectives on the animal's habitat and even into one of the indoor spaces. Especially the houses here are elaborately styled with African touches, and the brand new meerkat enclosure follows the same theme, giving the small predators a fresh new home as well. The rest of this area is less spectacular, though I really liked the spacious hoofed animal enclosures. My only small criticism here would be the fencing at the Barbary sheep exhibit, especially since the other habitats offer a much more open view of the animals, at least when they don't try to hide like this bongo. The scimitar-horned oryxes can even be seen inside their stable building. This house also hosts a variety of smaller mammals and some reptiles, and I think it has a really appealing design, but on busy days it can get quite crowded in here. So I personally prefer the Madagascar house. Here, in a tropical atmosphere, you'll find several lemurs along with other species, some of which can roam freely here. And in the back there's even a nocturnal section for Goodman's mouse lemurs and white-tailed ensangi. Of course, the lemurs also have outdoor habitats, and I thought the open one where the red-ruffed lemurs can climb above the visitors' heads was conceptually really interesting. Let's also take a quick first look at the South African fur seal enclosure here, but since we're saving the Africarium for the end, let's head over to Europe for now. And in this area, once again, we are greeted by another fantastic modern habitat, the wolf enclosure, which was opened in 2019. Covering about 2,500 square meters, it provides the animals with a fitting environment, plus the viewing tower, and even the chance to step into a cave-like viewing area offers some really great ways to experience the wolves. And the educational aspect here is also done quite well. Once more, the rest of this area feels a bit less spectacular, though with its large pond, the setting is very idyllic. Unfortunately, the path ended for us at a construction site as a bridge between the bears and Barbary macaques was being renovated. So I could only take a look at that part of the grounds from the outside. Too bad, especially since the bear enclosure is supposed to be huge. But never mind, the zoo has so much to offer that a construction site like this barely makes a difference. And once we pass the okapis and the Red River hawks at the ranch with ponies and the like, a glance glance at the map shows us that the really densely built part of the zoo is still ahead of us. And that's where it quickly becomes clear that, contrary to impressions you might have gotten so far, this park isn't a complete geo-zoo. Instead, for example, we're heading for an area where you can see a whole range of monkeys. And while the first impression, with another lemur enclosure, an island for ring-tailed lemurs, is still quite positive, this is the first time in the video I have to get really critical. Looking at this circular facility, which houses 5 different species, the lack of space is pretty obvious. Sure, the furnishing makes the most of these small enclosures, and at least for the Celebes crested macaques 2 sections were combined, but it still simply isn't enough space for the monkeys in my eyes. And that makes it hard to really enjoy even the sight of the rare white-faced capuchins. The only species that has a decent setup here are the yellow-crested capuchins, which have access to a larger open-air enclosure. Unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily get better as we move on to the main monkey house. Built back in 1887, with its striking Moorish-style architecture, it's certainly an eye-catcher. Inside the house is definitely enhanced by greenery, and you can clearly see that the indoor areas have been modernized multiple times over the past 138 years. The last modernization has been completed in 2007. The number of species has probably also already decreased over time, but there's still quite a variety, including rarities like the loosed monkeys. However, this diversity comes at a price. The outdoor enclosures are once again far from generous in size. There are good attempts to give the animals more space, but these would need to be taken further, and probably you have to reduce the number of species here even more. The chimpanzees have their own building, which sadly clearly dates back to the 1970s. It was renovated earlier this year, but aside from the updated wall murals, new educational elements and seating, I'm not entirely sure what has actually improved for the animals. The outdoor enclosure is a little bit better, but also far from being great. From what I know, the 3 chimps still living here are quite old, so I really hope this setup is being phased out. At least the baboon enclosure, built in 1939, built from granite blocks from the Carboniferous period, still looks impressive, and it can still provide a good living environment for the group of Anubis baboons, just the furnishing probably needs to be renewed. So at least it's not all bad. The northern white-cheeked gibbons and squirrel monkeys also live on really nice island enclosures. Passing by a rather plain Australian-themed enclosure, a separate enclosure for red kangaroos, and the fluffy Poitou donkeys, we now move on to the so-called Terai Pavilion. Named after a lowland region at the foot of the Himalayas in India, this house is home to Indian rhinoceros, which I even caught bathing here. Though I was even more excited to spot the rusty spotted cat that also lives here. These adorable cats, also native to India, are only kept in a few mainland European zoos, so this was something really special for me. And I really loved how creatively the enclosure extends into 2 adjacent trees, especially since I could see that the cat is using that, probably to observe its surroundings from above. At the very end of the day, I was also lucky enough to see one of the clouded leopards, which always makes me happy to catch on camera. While you can look into one section of their indoor enclosure here, the densely planted outdoor areas allow the clouded leopards to easily hide from visitors' view. I wish their enclosures could be a little bit higher to allow for even better climbing structures, but together with the snow leopard enclosure next door, this section that was built in 2018 is done quite well overall, also in terms of theming. I just hope the snow leopards have access to an additional outdoor area behind the scenes, especially since they are being successfully bred here. Next up is the harbor seal enclosure, which I probably have to praise for offering natural substrate, because that's not a given. Otherwise, there's not much that stands out here, except perhaps the view from the bridge and the chance to see them underwater underneath. Next to it are 2 older bear enclosures, now seemingly home to just a single Asian black bear. And even though two areas have probably already been merged here, I hope this is another phase-out model. The enclosure complex for the Sumatran tigers, on the other hand, is still quite modern. Two roughly equal-sized, separable, over-netted enclosures with glass viewing panels giving visitors a good look, while the layout of the enclosure and the planting still allow the tigers to retreat. But with a bit of luck you can spot them near their pool or lounging on platforms. It's nothing groundbreaking, but a solid complex that's also well suited for breeding, which was spectacularly successful in October of 2024 with quadruples. By the time of our visit, the cubs were already a few months old, and they are probably already looking for places to send them under the European Endangered Species Program. Across from the tiger enclosures, you get the best view of the two outdoor enclosures for the Indian rhinos, which currently, as far as I know, houses only a single rhino. But the giant is not entirely alone, it shares its enclosure with muntjacs, and above it, on the trees, platforms and ropes, a group of pileated gibbons is swinging around. A really cool concept that I've only seen in a few other zoos so far. While the rhino enclosures are quite big, the elephant area is understandably less impressive at first glance. However, the two residents here are older elephants brought here from a circus to give them a quiet and relaxed retirement. The elephant house itself is clearly another historic gem, built in the historicist style and completed in 1888. Today, besides the elephants, it also houses pygmy hippos, probably in the same space that once held their larger relatives before they were moved to the Africarium. Until recently, there were also tapirs here, which now have left the zoo. Capybaras live here instead. The next historic building is just around the corner. At first glance, the birdhouse and its adjoining aviaries appear rather modern, and that has its reason. This building was extensively renovated over a period of 4 years. That becomes evident not only in the outdoor aviaries, one of which on the opposite side of the building is even walk-through. Inside the house as well, the investment of around 6.8 million zloty has clearly paid off. Originally opened in 1889, the building now shines in new splendor, featuring charming design elements such as wall paintings and, most importantly, a modern approach to bird husbandry. It still offers a fine and fairly diverse collection with rare highlights like the Palawan hornbill, which is kept in only 7 facilities across Europe. The only disappointing aspect is that some species still do not have access to outdoor aviaries. Bird enthusiasts also get their money's worth around the building, for example with a large aviary for Steller sea eagles. In the so-called bird corner there are many more aviaries, some for additional hornbill species such as the impressive Papuan hornbill, and others for example for various owls, including the snowy owl. All of them live in at least solid aviaries, and in some cases even truly excellent ones. Relatively new, opened in 2024, is the walk-through flamingo aviary, home not only to greater flamingos, but also to species such as African sacred ibises and red-breasted geese. On the ponds that we pass next, there is more waterfall to discover. This part of the park is once again very idyllic, complemented by well-designed hoofed animal enclosures, for instance for golden tarkins. But there are also ibexes here and various deers, reindeer for example. And then there's this modern habitat for palace cats, however I was unfortunately unable to spot them, so our attention shifts directly to the old bear castle just behind it. Completed even before the actual opening of the zoo in 1863-64, and with bear cages in a castle or fortress style backdrop, it represents a typical form of bear keeping of that era. But very few historic structures like this have survived to this day. Thankfully, of course, no bears are kept here anymore. The still occupied section now houses additional owl species. Up until now, I have of course skipped over a few species here and there, especially when, as with the yellow-throated martens, they simply didn't show. But if you haven't had the impression so far that Wrocław Zoo is actually one of the most species-rich zoos in the world, that wasn't just you. We felt exactly the same way. Sure, the zoo keeps a lot of species, but it didn't really come across to me as anything extreme. Except in the terrarium. Good lord, the terrarium. This building has been here since the zoo opened in 1885, and while I'm sure a lot has changed here over time, it is still absolutely packed. According to the zoo's website, it houses 221 reptile species, 49 amphibian species, and 192 invertebrates. That makes 462 species in total. And with that, we already uncovered the secret of why this is considered one of the most species-rich zoos in the world. It comes down in very large part to this building right here. The sheer diversity you find here is just mind-blowing. It completely overwhelms you, and the house actually manages to present some of this diversity quite nicely. The large open hall, for example, with its open turtle enclosures surrounded by lush greenery, creates a surprisingly pleasant and atmospheric setting. You can also look down from two balconies onto the hall below. Of course, these balconies are also fully packed. Architecturally, it's quite impressive, and as you make your way through, there are even some unexpected surprises, like a side room that contains a walk-through butterfly garden. Because of course there is. Even in the stairwells you'll find terrariums. After all those animals have to fit somewhere. The problem though is that the quality of husbandry ranges from fairly well done and solid to downright terrible, and not always just because of a lack of space. Is this a good setup for a slender-snouted crocodile? I don't think so, even though at least I can tell it was actually designed with crocodiles in mind. But what on earth is this supposed to be? There's no way this enclosure was ever conceived for a caiman. Maybe it's just temporarily, but then it's still temporarily terrible. So as much as I admire the diversity, someone really needs to go through here and cut back. If Marie Kondo ever set foot in this building, she'd probably faint. At least in 2015, they relocated the Komodo dragons into an extension where they now have a genuinely well-designed habitat. By the way, according to Zootierliste, the zoo actually keeps 20 monitor lizard species in total. 20! By comparison, the aquarium feels much more normal. Sure, there's plenty to see here as well, but for the most part it's classic aquarium fish like freshwater angelfish, and it's not an overwhelming number of species. Though honestly, I still found the usual setup of tanks lined up one after another a bit tiresome. Much more to my liking is the so-called Odrarium, which, as the name might suggest, is dedicated to the native wildlife of the Oder River. Here you descend into a cave and emerge on the riverbed, where you come face to face with many of the fish native to the Oder. It's really well done. And the otter habitat behind it also struck me as really cool, with its curved design making it architecturally very interesting. It even provides nearly 360-degree underwater viewing. And with that, we finally head to the Africarium, the much-touted highlight of the zoo. So we'll just take a quick look at the zebras and giraffes on the large savannah enclosure before it, since it literally sits in the shadow of the massive building we are about to enter. The scale and the numbers here are impressive on its own. On a total area of 1.9 hectares, a complex was built for roughly 220 million zloty that focuses on a unique concept. Because as the name promises, Africa meets aquarium, giving visitors insights into various African aquatic ecosystems. It starts with the Red Sea tank, where the visitor path gently slopes downwards, allowing you to literally dive deeper into the fascinating underwater world. The 900 cubic meter tank is home to 60 different species, with probably the biggest highlights being the zebra sharks and spotted eagle race, for which the European breeding program is coordinated here. From there, the path leads into a grotto with thick glass panels giving views into the 715 cubic meter hippo tank. We had to wait a little longer to meet the hippos though. There's also a burrow for aardvarks and a tunnel system for naked mole rats, which may not fit perfectly with the concept, but it's a fun addition nonetheless. The grotto continues past large aquariums showcasing the colorful underwater life of Lake Malawi and Lake Tanganyika. Here too you can enjoy the sight of numerous fish species before surfacing again. From above you now get a really good overview over the hippo enclosure, which is designed in a canyon style. But there is a lot more to see than just the hippos. The artworks can get up here in their own enclosure, and there is a separate area for Kirk's dik-diks and dwarf mangooses. And the hall also houses many free-flying birds, so there's really a lot to see. Conceptually and in terms of design, it's all impressive, but there's one issue. The hippos do not have an outdoor enclosure. Admittedly, the roof of the hall can be opened, so the hippos get fresh air, direct sunlight and natural weather at times, but with setups like this, I always wonder why. Wouldn't it still be better if the hippos had a proper outdoor area, like in basically every other zoo? Especially since the animals have no natural substrate here and therefore can't really graze like they would in nature. The execution of this concept is ingenious, as the netting keeping the birds from flying away is barely visible. But again, why? That's not a question with the shark tunnel. In a large aquarium, it's the most logical design choice in the world. This 3,100 cubic meter tank represents the Mozambique Channel, the stretch of sea between, well, Mozambique and Madagascar. Here too there is a multitude of species to spot, like black-tip reef sharks and various ray species, including the rarely kept white-spotted guitarfish. And then there is Stefan, the only green sea turtle in a Polish zoo. As you can see, during our visit it was quite crowded here, but other than that it was also a fantastic experience. Now the path leads us back into the main hall, though this part has been separated architecturally. Through the glass front you can look outside onto the enclosure of the African penguins. They live here in a truly spacious habitat, which can of course also be viewed from the outside. And as long as the penguins are on land, they are actually easier to observe from here, even if the viewing opportunities aren't quite as open as you might know them from other zoos. On the other side of the ship-shaped extension, which also houses a bistro, you'll find the enclosure of the South African fur seals. In terms of design and size, it does make a very strong first impression. Looking more closely though, you'll notice that a large part of the land area is blocked off by an electric fence, and therefore not even accessible to the seals. That's a bit of a drawback, and to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what the reasoning behind it is. From inside the Africarium, you can observe both the fur seals and the penguins while they are diving, which is a fantastic sight, especially because their pools are truly large. The fur seal pool holds 3,600 cubic meters of water, and the penguin pool at 2,460 cubic meters is one of the largest I know. Of course, this also means you need a bit of luck for the penguins to swim near the glass. Here below, basically in the hull of the ship, you'll also find several additional aquariums with fish. So no matter what, there's always something to see. And with that, we move on to the final section, the tropics. Here, two large enclosures are home to Nile crocodiles. Surrounded by dense vegetation, the path gradually slopes down around the exhibit, allowing for ever deeper underwater views. And then we descend to meet the only manatees in Poland. You might be surprised by this, since manatees are often associated with Florida and South America rather than Africa, and for the individuals here this is true, as they are Caribbean manatees, but there is in fact a West African manatee species called creatively, well, a West African manatee, so conceptually they still fit in rather well as stand-ins, and of course they are an absolute highlight. Especially because, as you have seen already, through the large curved glass panels, you are getting a wonderful underwater view of their 1250 cubic meter pool. And when you follow the path upwards, you can also look down onto the left part of the pool from above. And here we were lucky enough to arrive just in time for their feeding, and watching the animals place their front flippers on the floating platform was just incredibly cute. But once again, in this tropical hall of crocodiles and manatees, you can also discover a number of free-flying birds, though in my case I had to be content with just spotting a little bittern. And finally, there are also adorable elephant shrews, for which a separate enclosure has been created up here. And with that, we have completed our tour of the Africarium, which, aside from the points I've mentioned, really impressed me overall. Dedicating such a large modern building to a unique concept like African aquatic ecosystems is simply a brilliant idea. And since the execution is for the most part successful, both in terms of visitor experience and animal husbandry, the Africarium can still be regarded as an absolute highlight of the zoo more than 10 years after its opening. And in fact, I would go so far as to say that this is simply up there as one of the most impressive zoo exhibits anywhere in Europe. And since I also enjoyed most of the rest of the zoo, I can wholeheartedly recommend a visit here. The park ground has many really beautiful spots, the historic buildings are stunning, and the animal collection leaves very little to be desired. The standards of animal husbandry are mostly solid as well, apart from many of the primate enclosures, where I really hope to see improvements soon. There are in fact plans for a new modern gorilla exhibit, which looks very promising, but that doesn't change things for the primates currently living here. And yes, the terrarium is simply overcrowded. I think it would be better to reduce and focus here, even if that meant losing the title as one of the world's most species-rich zoos. Normal visitors wouldn't really lose much. At least for me, with better primate enclosures and a modernized terrarium, Wrocław Zoo would have an excellent chance of making it into my personal top 10 zoos in Europe. In fact, it might even be a contender as things are. But does the same apply to Łódź Zoo? With its Orientarium, it has realized a similarly spectacular large-scale project, and there's plenty more to discover there as well. If you don't want to miss that, make sure to hit subscribe, because I've got quite a few more amazing zoos to show you soon, and also a couple that are a bit less impressive. Let me know your thoughts on Wrocław Zoo and the Africarium down in the comments. Tell me which zoos in Poland I still need to check out, and if you don't feel like typing much, then at least give me a thumbs up. Thank you so much, have a nice day, see you soon, or as we say in Germany, auf Wiedersehen, und bitte entschuldigt, dass wir damals, nun, also für viele Dinge, aber wir haben halt auch so ein paar Tiere hier erschossen, als, ihr wisst schon, naja, ist lang her, vergessen und vergeben, oder?